Hi, you're watching Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone, and today I thought we would do something a little bit more laid back and have a little bit of fun. And I am going to rank the Star Wars opening scenes in all of the Star Wars movies from best to worst. Now, just a couple of parameters so you understand what's going on here. I am talking about, when I say all of the Star Wars films, I am referring only to the Star Wars trilogy films. I'm not going to talk about the standalone movies. So this is all of the Star Wars trilogy movies, their opening scenes ranked from best to worst. So obviously we've got the original trilogy, we've got the prequel trilogy, and we've got so far at the time of making this video, 2 films in the new trilogy. And so I'm going to rank the opening scenes from number 1 to number 8. The best is number 1, the worst is obviously number 8. Now, the other important thing to understand how we're going to do this, so it kind of makes some sort of sense, is, and I'm not jumping around all over the place, we're going to rate each film by looking at them in the order in which they were released. So the what you might call the cinematic historical timeline, the chronology of when they were released in the cinemas. I'm not going to follow the chronology of the story. So we're not going to start with the prequel trilogy films and then move to the original trilogy and then move to the new trilogy. We're going to start with the original trilogy because those films were obviously released first, and then we're going to move to the prequels because they were released next, and then we're going to finish with the new trilogy. So with that in mind, let's jump straight in. And the first of the original trilogy films, the very first Star Wars film that was ever released, was Star Wars A New Hope. And interestingly enough, that is also for me my number 1. It is the top, it is the best opening scene, I think, in a Star Wars movie. It's a close run thing, as we'll find out soon, but it is the best. There's nothing new or earth-shattering about this commentary. You've probably all heard this before, but there's lots of great visual symbolism there. And it was a very impressive piece of visual effects. It was a very impressive opening to a film. It didn't muck around, it just got straight into the action. Now, I wasn't there, I was too young to be there for one of those screenings. I watched that movie later, but there were people that I know who were present at that film the first time it came to a cinema, and they will tell you about the fact, and yet this is quite a common thing you'll hear from people, when that Star Destroyer came swooping in from the back and just filled the screen, and just all the noise and lights and the visuals of what you were seeing, it was quite an astounding thing. And it was quite an amazing experience to have at a movie. It was just so new. We take those kind of things for granted today, and we just assume that films always had that kind of, what would you call it, that visual sensibility. But this was new and groundbreaking stuff. And so that's why it edges out the competition. We'll see in a second, there is a film that came close, another Star Wars film that came close, but this one edges out the competition. This is part of the reason why it was new, it was groundbreaking, it was doing something different. There's also lots of great visual symbolism in that first film in Star Wars A New Hope in the opening scene. Again, this is nothing new or earth-shattering. You probably have all heard this before, but you've got this tiny little rebel ship. Princess Leia's ship is fleeing from the Empire. You have this huge Star Destroyer which swoops in from behind and dominates the frame. It takes over the whole frame. So very quickly, this ship has filled the entire frame. And that gives you a sense, it's a piece of visual symbolism to show you how powerful the Empire is. The other thing is the ship just keeps on coming. There's just, like, you would probably expect by now the ship to have ended. Like, now we're looking at the back of the ship, but it just keeps on coming. So you've got this very long and very pointed ship that it fills the whole frame and it just keeps on coming. There's more ship, more ship, more ship. And what it does is it gives you a sense of the reach of the Empire. It's always this forward driving momentum, this dominance, this power, the scope, the scale of what you're dealing with, and the little guys really are the little guys. So there's lots of very powerful and important visual symbolism in Star Wars A New Hope in the opening scene, and it's an iconic piece of cinema. If you play that shot to anyone, or just about anyone who's watched films, they will know what that is. Even if they are not a die-hard Star Wars fan, they will tell you that was from a Star Wars movie. They know it's Star Wars. It's just iconic, and it just sits in the canon of iconic cinematography, iconic cinema scenes that everyone, it's just sort of universally known wherever you go, that's Star Wars right there. And so for that reason, it pips out all other contenders and comes in for me at number 1. Next film that was released was The Empire Strikes Back. Now, interestingly though, The Empire Strikes Back, the opening scene in The Empire Strikes Back for me is number 5 on my list. It jumps down a few places to number 5. The film itself is easily, I think, the best of any of the Star Wars movies, but that opening scene only manages to come in at number 5. It's a very basic and fundamental and well executed establishing shot. It's not terrible, but it doesn't stand out either. So for me, it doesn't climb high on the rating list. It sits at number 5. Interestingly, it's the only scene too, first and only time where we have a Star Destroyer that's actually coming at us, which is kind of interesting. Now, it's an interesting little piece of visual symbolism that the Star Destroyer has now been turned around in the other direction. So remember we started with A New Hope and it's chasing, it's dominant, it's moving forward. Now the Empire is moving backwards, it's been turned around. And that's exactly what's happened when you think about it. So at the end of A New Hope, the Empire has suffered a humiliating military defeat. They haven't been destroyed, they haven't been defeated totally, but they have suffered what is a pretty serious setback. And so they've been turned around. The flow of the film, if you like, has been turned around. It's no longer all one-way traffic and the Empire is the dominant party here and they are getting their way. Now there's a little bit of uncertainty. And so the Star Destroyer coming at us, first and only time we see this in an opening sequence where the Star Destroyer is moving towards us, is kind of is a little piece of symbolism which points to the fact that the Empire is now not in the same dominant position that it was. However, they are still the dominant party. And you see that very clearly because as this thing comes at us, it's very menacing, very quickly, it's a huge thing, and it's obviously shooting off these probe droids to go and look for the enemy, the rebels. So they are still in the dominant position, even though things have been turned around and they aren't in the same commanding position that they were, that same ultimate strength position that they had in the first film. But it is, as I said, this is a very effective sort of establishing shot, but it doesn't stand out as anything great. It's not visually astounding. It's just well executed. It's not terrible, but it doesn't stand out from the pack either. Next film that was released is Return of the Jedi. And for me, Return of the Jedi is number 6 on my list. Again, it is a very effective establishing shot. There's nothing terrible about this. There's nothing bad about the cinematography or the visuals, or it's all very clear to understand what's happening. You have that opening shot where we see the new Death Star still not fully completed. But here's why, and the next thing that happens for me is why I put it at number 6 when I had to think about these films and why I'd rank them the way that I did. The reason I put that opening scene at number 6 and not higher on the list was because George Lucas just repeats the same motif, the same visual, the same shot that he used in A New Hope. You have a Star Destroyer which swoops in from behind and fills the whole screen. Now, that's all very good and well, it's a lovely shot, but it's just it's a carbon copy of what we've already seen. What I like about Return of the Jedi is from the bottom of the Star Destroyer this time we see the Emperor's shuttle come out. And for me, that Emperor's shuttle is a great piece of model making. It's a great piece of spaceship design. It's just, there's something sort of iconically Star Wars about that, and it was introducing a new element to Star Wars, and it was quite an impressive little new element, that shuttle that they created, and that pops out the bottom. But for me, because we see that repeating, that copying of what's already gone before, I put it at number 6 on my list. These films here are what you might call maybe the mushy middle. The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and the next film are what you might call the mushy middle. They are what you would call reasonably well executed establishing shots, but they don't stand out from the pack. But at the same time, they're not terrible either. They sort of sit in the mushy middle of these opening scenes. Next on the list was the movie The Phantom Menace. And interestingly, obviously it was the next cinematic release. It was the next movie to be released. It was the first of the prequel trilogy films. And it's also number 7 on my list. Why is it number 7? Because the shot itself is actually, it's pretty good. Interesting, these new ships. You have the ship carrying the 2 Jedis, which appears from the side of the frame, and then we pan with it as it moves around, and you see the blockade around the planet. Now, what's interesting for me and why, because it's sort of a close run thing. These, as I said, these films, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, The Phantom Menace, they're in the mushy middle for me. They're not terrible, but they don't stand out either. But they are very competently and well executed opening scenes. So when I was thinking about it, I couldn't just all have them grouped together in one big lump, so I had to rank them. Why did The Phantom Menace go a bit further down the list? Well, because it's the first time we actually have to be told what's going on. Now, I know this might seem like nitpicking and it might seem a small thing because the film does establish pretty quickly what we're looking at, but it's the first time in a Star Wars film where we're not exactly clear from the visuals what's going on. So A New Hope, it's very clear. You've got this huge ship that is chasing a small ship and they are under attack. It's very clear. Then in Empire Strikes Back, we know now what a Star Destroyer is and what it represents. It represents the Empire. It's very clear what we're looking at and what's going on here. They are sending out ships. The Empire is sending out things off into the galaxy. Then comes Return of the Jedi. Again, it's very clear visually what we're looking at. We know what's happening. But The Phantom Menace, even though we're told in the opening title crawl, once we cut to that first opening scene, it's still not clear who is who. Even the blockade, it's not quite clear that it's a blockade. I can't blame George Lucas for this. It's a new era. He's going backwards in time. You've got new ship designs. We don't have the Empire. We don't have some of that visual iconography to draw on to show us who's who. It's not immediately clear. And to his credit, very quickly, as soon as we get inside the ships, we are told what we're looking at. We know, okay, that's the Jedi ship and that's the blockade we're looking at, but it's not immediately clear. It's not blatantly obvious that this is what we're seeing. And so for that reason, I know that might seem nitpicking, but it is. I had to try and somehow separate the pack a little bit. And for me, for that reason alone, I put this at number 7, just the fact that we need a little bit more explanation on this particular shot. The next film to be released was Attack of the Clones. Now, some people suggest that this was the worst of the prequel trilogy films. I don't know about that. I still think that Jar Jar Binks was just an absolute disaster, and the Phantom Menace for me was the worst of the prequel films. I just think there's a lot about that film that was stuffed up. It's a film that you can take out of the sequence. You don't even need it there. Young Anakin is just too young. It's just Jar Jar Binks. There's lots of things that I don't like about the Phantom Menace. So for me, it still is the worst of the 3 films. Attack of the Clones, though, for some people is the worst prequel film. Attack of the Clones, for me, is not a great film. However, the opening scene in Attack of the Clones, for me, climbs all the way to number 3 on my list. So if A New Hope is number 1, Attack of the Clones comes in at number 3. So that's pretty high on the list to get in at 3rd for a bad film in a prequel trilogy, which wasn't that flash. When you look honestly and give it an honest appraisal about the storytelling and the filmmaking that was involved there, there's some big problems in the prequel trilogy. However, Attack of the Clones, the opening scene, comes in at number 3. Why? Well, first of all, and this is an interesting change, there's a bit of a change here, a development, an innovation, if you like. Every other film that we've seen so far, when you get to the end of the opening credit crawl and it's crawled all the way up and it finally disappears and you have that shot of the starfield, every other film, what happens is you get that few seconds where we linger on the starfield, and then what do? We pan downwards. The camera always pans down, and you look at a planet, you look at a spacecraft, there's something there in the frame to give you some establishing shots, but what happens is we pan down. This is the first time we get to the end of the credit crawl, the credits all roll up, they disappear, and then we linger on the starfield, and then we pan up. First time that happens in a Star Wars film. And what's interesting here is we pan up and we see the bottom of a planet. Well, I guess it's at the top of the frame. It's filling this top third of the frame as you see a portion of a planet. It's Coruscant. The planet itself, I think, visually is interesting. It's new. It's unique to what we've seen in Star Wars. For some reason, I've always loved that visual of Coruscant with the lights and the way that the city is structured and the way you see it from space. To me, I really like that. It was different. It's different to other planets we've seen in Star Wars before. And there's something about that visual. I just really like it. It speaks, I think that it speaks to me about Coruscant as this sort of this very important, busy, industrious sort of place. And it's a very modern planet in the Star Wars context. And it really does those visuals of that planet speak to that, and also the visual itself. If you look at the planet, there is an atmosphere, there's a haze there. This is George Lucas with his visual sensibilities. George Lucas was a master at visuals, and there are some great visuals in the prequels. Storytelling, not so flash, but the visuals, absolutely. And this is an example for me of a great visual. So first of all, it's unique. We pan up, we see the bottom of Coruscant, and we see those ships that come flying into Coruscant. And the interesting thing is we're now looking at a planet from the bottom. So it's a new way of looking at a planet. It's sort of not the norm of how you would look at a planet. Normally when you land on a planet, normally visually we're used to seeing people land on the planet. They come down onto the planet. This time we're seeing something which is actually quite normal in space, but not necessarily the norm when you see it in a film. Is you see these ships that are landing up towards the planet rather than coming down onto the planet. But they are obviously still landing on the planet. Now it's a cool little visual. The ships fly in, the planet is up here, they are right way, and then they roll. The ships roll, so now the ships are actually positioned in the correct way to land on a planet. So obviously the bottom of the ship has now turned around, and the planets here, they're going to land exactly as they should. And this is where George Lucas, and this is really important, we'll come back to this in just a second when we talk about the opening scene from another Star Wars movie. Very quickly, George Lucas changes the camera angle and the shot that we're looking at in that opening scene. So now we're the right way round again. And we see, what do we see? We see those ships coming down into land. That is really important. It might seem small. It might not seem significant at first. And it's a very subtle change, but it's a really, really important one. But for me, because there's a bit of innovation there, and I like the visuals of what we're seeing, for me, that goes to number 3 on my list, Attack of the Clones, number 3 opening scene for me. Next released film was Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the Sith, I think, is the best of the Star Wars prequel films. It's not great, it's not perfect, it has flaws, but for me it is the best. There's things about that film that make it stand out from the others. There's plenty of problems. Anakin turns too fast. There's issues in the film itself, but there are also some really great moments in that film that just stand out as really phenomenal pieces of Star Wars filmmaking, and I think just filmmaking in general. And for me, Revenge of the Sith, the opening scene in Revenge of the Sith is number 2 on my list. It makes it all the way to number 2. Not only does it make it to number 2 on the list of best opening Star Wars scenes, but it's a close run second. It almost is second, or first and second equal, if you like, or first equal with Star Wars A New Hope. But it doesn't quite get there. Why doesn't it get there? Well, I think Star Wars A New Hope was just groundbreakingly iconic. And I think that's the thing that it pips it at the post, purely because it was groundbreaking, it was innovation, something brand new, and it's just got that iconography, it's got that iconic status that just elevates it above what we see in Revenge of the Sith. However, Revenge of the Sith, that opening scene is a really, really close second. Why? Well, because I think we've got George Lucas and his skills in the whole visual arena. They are at their best, and this is some of his best work, I think, in any of the films he's made. There's these sort of moments, these visual moments that really stand out, and this is one of them. And it's not just the visuals, but everything from a cinematic perspective all comes together in this opening shot. So first of all, you see something important. There is symbolism present again, important symbolism actually, in this opening shot. You see the planet Coruscant, and the first thing we notice is off in the distance in the far horizon, the sun is fading. The sun is setting. Now that's really important, because that imagery, that motif, that symbolism of the setting sun, we see that several times in this movie. The setting of the sun, the going down of the sun, which symbolizes an ending of something, the ending of the day, but in this case, the ending of the day of the Jedi, is a motif that keeps appearing in this film, and it's actually really important visual storytelling. It's an important visual storytelling cue, and it's there right from the very beginning. We are seeing the setting of the sun, and so that's great visual symbolism. Next, you have the drums, the musical score. This is Lucas and Williams at their finest. This partnership, this beautiful partnership in operation, and at its peak again for Star Wars. So first of all, the musical cue now that we have is just those beating drums. There's no other instruments. We start with the drum beat. Now, why would that be important? Well, again, it's about symbolism and that whole idea of the drums of war that are beating. The war drum is beating. The drums of war, the call to war is beating loud and clear. And that's exactly what we see. And it's actually the journey that we go on in this opening sequence too, in this opening shot where we discover what's really going on. But it's a great piece of symbolism again. Now then we get the rest of the musical score. The other instruments start to join in. It's not just drums, and there's an indication of the urgency of what's happening, and we see that scene of the Republic cruiser. And it looks relatively serene. If it wasn't for the fact that there's this music which tells us, this musical cue giving us the sense of urgency, it might just look like a Republic cruiser that's on patrol. It looks sort of almost genteel, out in space, just cruising above Coruscant. Then all of a sudden, we see very quickly into that opening scene are injected the Jedi fighters. And it's clear that they are traveling somewhere in a hurry. Again, the musical cue, the visuals, the way we're tracking these guys, the engine noises, we know that they are speeding somewhere important. But it's still not quite clear what's happening. Are they on a mission? Are they going from point A to B? Are they on some important patrol? We don't know what's going on here. Are they going down to the planet? Well, all of a sudden we find out. We track these Jedi fighters and they come over the top. Remember, we're still looking down at the top of that Republic cruiser. They come over the top of the Republic cruiser and they do that amazing roll shot as they go over the top, and we keep tracking and we follow them down, and all of a sudden we realize we are looking at a space battle. There is pitch warfare going on. It's not serene. It's not quiet at all. They're actually in the midst of a major space battle. And it's revealed to us as we come over the top of that Republic cruiser, and then we look down and there's this just pitch warfare. They are at war now. And it's just suddenly out of nowhere. We've gone from peace to war, and that is exactly what has happened in the sequence of the story. So again, there's this great symbolism here. And then we just keep tracking them, and that tracking shot, this is really, really impressive. It's the longest of the Star Wars opening scenes, and it's a really impressive piece of visuals. This is, I think, George Lucas and his team at their best, and they are showing exactly what they are capable of doing. And it is a glorious piece of George Lucas filmmaking. And you come over into that pitch warfare, we keep tracking through, and then we discover whose ships they really are, who's inside the ships, and what's really going on. It is a great scene. For me, it's number 2. It's a close run thing. The reason that it doesn't pip or find itself equal with A New Hope is just because of the fact that A New Hope manages to squeak in there ahead because of the fact that it was innovative, it was new, it was something different, and this just doesn't have that iconic status, but it is a phenomenal opening scene. The next movie that was released was The Force Awakens, and here's where things get interesting, because for me, The Force Awakens is the worst opening scene in a Star Wars movie. We literally, in the space of 2 releases, we go from Revenge of the Sith, and the next thing we've got is the start of this new trilogy with The Force Awakens, and you've got what is the second best, very close to being equal with the best Star Wars opening scene ever. And then the very next film, the new trilogy that kicks off, and the very next film released, The Force Awakens, you have what I think is the worst Star Wars opening scene. I'm kind of surprised that not more people have been critical of this opening scene, because visually I think it's confusing. It is of all of the Star Wars films, it is the worst. And let me explain what I mean. First of all, and go back and watch this for yourself if you don't believe me, when you're finished watching this video, switch it off, go and get yourself a copy, or at least watch it on a big screen somewhere, or a bigger screen where you can actually see. So not a tiny screen, we can actually take in the visuals and the implications of what's happening, and you can see what's actually happening on screen. So the first thing is, in the opening credit crawl, we are told that Princess Leia has dispatched her most daring pilot to the planet of Jakku. And then next thing you know, the credit crawl disappears, we pan down, and what do you see? You see what you think is a planet with a moon behind it. So you think, I'm looking at Jakku. You're not actually looking at Jakku though, and it's never really established. In fact, it was interesting to see after this film that there were people jumping on internet forums and asking, what am I looking at? And they were having to get confirmation outside of the film to confirm exactly what they were looking at. So what we've got is this shot. We've just been told we're going to the planet of Jakku. We then have this shot where in actual fact we are effectively on the planet of Jakku looking upwards. And what we see is the moons of Jakku, and that's what we're actually looking at. The first thing you notice about the moons, though, is they don't quite look right. There's something about those moons that they look too clean, they look too precise, too digital perhaps, I don't know. But for me, there's a sort of an uncanny valley effect at a planetary level here with these two moons, and they don't look right. So that's the first thing you notice. Well, I certainly really sticks out for me watching it on Blu-ray. They just look too pristine. They look a little bit too circular rather than spherical. That's never an issue I've ever seen in Star Wars before. The planets, the moons, they always look the right shape. They always look like they've got a bit of atmosphere. They don't look so pristine that they look fake. In this film, that for me, there's something not quite right about those two moons. We are looking up at the moons, though, as I said, it's not really clearly established that we're looking up at the moons. And then it kind of gets really confusing from this point because, for whatever reason, J.J. Abrams decided that he would bring a Star Destroyer into frame from the bottom of the frame. And it's a really weird way of doing things when you think about this, especially if you consider we're supposed to be looking up. And so basically you've got a really confused visual frame of reference. We rely on things here on Earth to get our frame of reference, even when we think about things out in space. Now obviously up, down, left, right, they are kind of moot points. They are concepts that don't apply the same way when you're out in space, when you're off a planet looking back at a planet. But the simple fact is that we don't spend our time off planets looking back at planets. We spend our time on planet Earth, and 99.99999% of all the things we see, our visual frame of reference is based on what we see from a perspective here on Earth, where up and down mean something, left and right, sideways, those kind of things mean something. And so you've got this opening sequence where you start with a very odd framing decision and a very odd point of reference where you're looking up, but it doesn't really look like you're looking up because you're too close to the moon anyway. Like when you look at our moon, it's never that close. It's not as close as that moon is in frame. And so it's, even if you want to say, well, the camera is obviously a bit further away than what the planet's surface is, it's sort of in between the planet and the moon, that's never established properly. And so it's kind of confusing. And what the end result is, you think you're looking side on at the planet Jakku. You're not actually looking at the planet Jakku, you're looking at a moon. And then all of a sudden, you get the Star Destroyer, which comes into frame in a really weird sort of way from the bottom, which just adds to the visual confusion. The establishing of what you're looking at is just not precise, it's not clear. It's in shadow. For whatever reason, he decided to do it in shadow. And what happens as a result of that is, if you're a first-time fan, so you're a young kid and this was the first time you've ever seen a Star Wars film, you're going to this movie and this is your first exposure to Star Wars, you're not going to recognise the silhouette of a Star Destroyer. So this is really something that's just there. It's a bit of fan service for the existing fan base, the adult or the older fans who know what a Star Destroyer looks like. If you're a young kid, you're not clear on what exactly you're looking at. Is this a ship? Is this grandma's house with a weather vane on top of it? It's not quite clear unless you know what a Star Destroyer is. Now, I know that's a small thing, but to me, it's about the preciseness and sort of visual storytelling, which could have been a lot better in this film, which is sort of lacking, and that's a sort of small example of that. The reason why I think they do that is because, again, what J.J. Abrams, I think, is trying to do here is he's trying to mimic A New Hope. And interestingly enough, that whole film is just one big rip-off of A New Hope. And it's not just mimicry, it's out and out plagiarizing A New Hope. But he's mimicking the opening shot without copying, beat for beat or image for image, visual for visual, the opening shot from Star Wars A New Hope. And so what he has is he has his Star Destroyer coming from the bottom, and it very quickly fills up the whole screen to again, it paints that picture of dominance and supremacy to show that the First Order is the supreme and very powerful enemy. But it's confusing. So you've got this Star Destroyer which comes into frame at a really weird angle and framing that's weird. It's not properly established that we're looking up at a moon. We're too close to the moon for it to make sense to our normal visual sensibility. So on planet Earth, when you look up at the moon's so far away, the way you see the moon is just different. You don't see the moon up there. You see it with a horizon always in view and things like that. None of that's established. And so you get this Star Destroyer comes into shot, and then all of a sudden, as if things couldn't get any more confusing, all of a sudden you have those drop ships. But the drop ships are coming out from what appears to be, because you're still not quite clear what you're looking at, it appears that the drop ships are coming out from the top, or the bottom of the Star Destroyer, because you think, I'm looking at Jakku, but I'm looking at a really weird angle of a Star Destroyer that's maybe doing an orbit, or am I looking down on the planet from the top, and I'm seeing this Star Destroyer come underneath me? Basically what's happening is your brain is now having to analyze and to try and figure out exactly what it is looking at, and that is not good visual storytelling. You're having to try and figure out what's going on because it's not clear. Things are not being established in a way that is particularly clear. Now, I get it. Some people are going to look at the film and they're just going to be wired in such a way that they're just going to see it straight away, perhaps, and it's not going to take too much for them to figure out what's going on. But most audience members are not going to get that. That's just not how most people are wired. Visually, we are used to assessing things and using particular frames of reference, and we're very, we're very bound by those frames of reference, and we rely on them. So when you present things to us in a movie, you've got to present them in a way that we don't have to do too much thinking. Now, what's interesting is you get these drop ships coming out. It looks like that they're coming out from the bottom, but then all of a sudden they circle around, and so you think to yourself, where are they going? Where the heck are these drop ships going? They're coming from the bottom of a Star Destroyer, but they're flying around the top. Why are they doing that? We've never ever seen that before. Every time we've seen a Star Destroyer in a movie, a previous Star Wars movie, we know that they've got that big cargo bay entrance portal at the bottom of the ship. We know that. We've seen things come out of those things in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. We know that's what that is, so we assume that drop ships would just drop towards the planet. But of course, we still haven't had it established for us that we're not looking at a planet. We're on a planet looking up at a moon, but the way we're looking up the moon is really weird. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And so these drop ships come flying around the top, and you think, why are they flying around the top? Now remember, if you put this into its proper context, it still doesn't make sense, because even if you know that you're looking up at a moon, and so you're on Jakku and you're looking up at a moon now, the moons of Jakku, those drop ships have appeared from the top of the Star Destroyer, not the bottom. Well, that's certainly how it appears. They swing around. So where have they come from? They've come from the top of the Star Destroyer. Why have they not come from the bottom of the Star Destroyer? You see, even if you know the framing and you understand and it's established for you in your mind what you're looking at, you're looking up at the bottom of the Star Destroyer. Why are those drop ships appearing from the top? Well, that's certainly how it appears. And even if they are meant to be, it's in shadow and they're actually meant to have suddenly somehow appeared from the bottom. It's confusing. It is so confusing. And then what happens is the drop ships fly towards us. Now, this is interesting. This is where they could have corrected the whole problem, and it would have been nice and simple. If they'd stayed with those drop ships and panned around and shown us those drop ships looking down from the top of the drop ships, now they've passed us, at Jakku, and so we see them, we pan with them, and then we see Jakku, and it's like, I'm looking at a moon, and now I'm looking at a planet, and those drop ships are heading towards the planet. Now it all makes sense. But for whatever reason, J.J. Abrams did not do that. He did not give us the one essential piece of the puzzle which would have established everything perfectly for us. Instead, what he does is just as these things come flying towards us, and remember, in our mind, unless you're one of those rare people who's figured out pretty quickly you're looking at a moon, those drop ships are flying in the wrong direction. Why are they flying away from what we think is the planet Jakku? Why are they coming towards us? And all of a sudden, as they're coming away from the planet, remember, it's not the planet, it's actually a moon, the shot, it just cuts. And then next thing, we're inside the dropship. Why? All they needed to do was actually pan and show us the planet Jakku beneath those dropships, and it all would have made sense. But they don't do that. Now contrast this with George Lucas and what he did in Attack of the Clones. Remember I talked about this before? In Attack of the Clones, George Lucas, and this is where he is the master of visual imagery, and he shows us that he has this perfect command of visual imagery in a way that J.J. Abrams doesn't have. Because what he does is he has the start of that sequence where those ships are flying up towards Coruscant and they're landing up. And remember, it's all the wrong way around there. So we pan up, we see Coruscant from the bottom, the ships are flying up towards it to land on top, but remember we normally have ships landing on a planet from the bottom. That's sort of normally our frame of visual reference. And so they do their roll, they turn to land, and so you've now got these ships that are actually the right way around, but we haven't shifted our point of view, and so we're looking at them upside down now. And what George Lucas does is very quickly he cuts to the next shot, and now the camera is actually pointing up at the ships. We are now on the planet, effectively looking from the point of view of being on the planet, looking up at these ships, and we follow them down, and then we watch them land the right way round, and it all makes sense. And you don't need to do any analyzing to understand and see what's happened. Your brain is not pulled out of the film trying to figure out what you're looking at. And so this is just, I really don't understand why people are not more critical of this opening scene, because it doesn't actually do what an opening scene should do particularly well, and that is establish for us, give us a setting and a context, and establish for us what is going on and where things are, and in particular where we are, our point of view in relation to the action that we're watching, and that is never properly established. And that's why, as I said, and you can still find the forums today where people got online and they're asking questions. What am I looking at? Is that Jakku that I'm seeing at the start of The Force Awakens? What is that? And people had to clarify. They had to seek answers from other people to find out exactly what they were looking at. That is not good visual storytelling. And for me, it's just terrible. It just fails that basic test of filmmaking that you would expect from a filmmaker when they are making a film. And I'm so surprised that no one actually thought to critique this and say, hey, maybe we should just have that little extra pan, and so people can see the planet Jakku, and it all suddenly makes sense. Because if they'd done that one simple thing, it all would have made sense. There would have been absolutely no confusion. You would have realized, this is kind of clever. I'm looking at something, but I'm actually looking at it the wrong way around. It's not what I thought it was. But they don't do that for whatever reason. Okay, moving right along. And the last film to date that has been released, the last Star Wars trilogy film, is The Last Jedi. Now, everyone who watches this channel knows that I have been critical of The Last Jedi. As a whole, this film is not good. It is the worst of the Star Wars movies, easily. Rotten Tomatoes bears this out. The fan base bears this out. This is not subjective conjecture. It is not a well-made film. It's got plenty of flaws in it. However, one thing you cannot fault about that film is the fact that it has some impressive visuals. And one thing where I actually think it's pretty good is the opening scene in The Last Jedi is very good. There's a bit of innovation there. It's interesting. We're looking down on a planet. The camera zooms down. It swoops down. It's a tracking shot again. We follow the camera down. We're looking at that ship. So the Rebel or the Resistance, I use the two terms interchangeably. That whole thing is confusing as a storytelling point, by the way, but we won't go into that right now. But you're looking down on that ship. Everyone is fleeing the planet, and we see the camera pans down through those escape ships as they're flying up. And it's a great piece of visual storytelling. And I think it looks good. It's well executed. The one thing I'd say, one little criticism is I would have held that shot for a little bit longer. I would have gone even further and kept that downward tracking shot going a little bit longer. For my sensibility, he cuts very quickly. I think he cuts too soon to the surface of the planet where we see ships taking off from the ground. And we're literally right on the ground, and we're watching them from side on as they take off. I think he cut too soon to that. However, this is good. It's interesting, and so for me, it goes at number 4. It's number 4 on my list. It falls into the mushy middle. It is not spectacular. It doesn't stand out, but it is not awful either, and it is nowhere near The Force Awakens. as far as how bad the opening scene in The Force Awakens is. It's actually quite an interesting little establishing shot. So, to summarise, and in a nutshell, from 8th, which is worst, to number 1, which is best. At number 8, we have The Force Awakens. It is the worst by a long shot of any of the Star Wars opening scenes. Number 7 is The Phantom Menace. And before I go any further, I should say this, that even though The Phantom Menace is number 7 on the list, basically, The Force Awakens could actually be at number 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. That's how big the gap is between these two films. Don't think for a minute that what I'm saying is that The Phantom Menace has a bad opening scene that is almost as bad as The Force Awakens. It isn't. It really isn't. The Phantom Menace has a very well executed establishing opening scene. It establishes what's going on. It's very clear what's going on. You don't need to visually interpret things. Your brain doesn't have to jump through hoops. It's very well shot and very well executed. It's just not excellent. It's just not up a cut above. And so, as I said before, the only reason I put it at number 7 was because it's the first time. Nitpicking, I know, maybe we have to have a little bit more explanation to be told what's going on. But that's not a minor thing. It's not a major thing. It's a pretty minor quibble, really. It was just a way of separating the pack a little bit. So The Force Awakens is like, it's way down here compared to where The Phantom Menace is at. So number 7 is The Phantom Menace. Number 6 is Return of the Jedi. Number 5 is The Empire Strikes Back. Number 4 is The Last Jedi. I know that might surprise some people, but I think it's a pretty good establishing shot, and the reason it beats out the other two, Return of the Jedi and The Empire Strikes Back, is because I think it's an innovative little visual. It's something new, and it's quite an impressive little visual to look at as an establishing shot. Number 3 is Attack of the Clones. The visual, the uniqueness of panning upwards, and the planet, and what we see happen in that little bit of excellence, visual storytelling excellence from George Lucas, where he spins the camera angle and shows us what our visual sensibilities are used to. For me, it just puts it above the others there. Second is Revenge of the Sith, and Revenge of the Sith, for me, as I said, is a very, very close second. But number 1 is A New Hope. And the reason number 1 pips it out and squeaks first past the post at the end of the race is because of the fact that it was innovative, and it's just such an iconic piece of cinematography. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating, please consider financially supporting the channel. The links for how to do that are found in the video description below. Even if it's just a one-off PayPal donation, if you like this little video here, and you feel so inclined, please leave a little tip in the tip jar at PayPal. Every little bit helps, especially in the current climate with the latest adpocalypse. Man, it really is stinging. It's hit a lot of creators, and I'm one of them pretty hard. I'm not a huge creator, but I've been hit hard by this. And so every little bit helps. A huge thank you to all the people who are supporting the channel and continue to support the channel on an ongoing basis. I really, really appreciate that. It allows me to keep doing this. And I'm overwhelmed by that kind of support, that you sort of say, hey, this is good enough for me to put a few of my hard-earned pesos into this channel on a regular basis. So I really appreciate that. Don't forget to like, to share, and to subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. There is plenty of interesting and maybe sometimes kooky stuff that goes on this channel. It's all over the place. I'm not a one-trick pony. I'm not a one-note musical. This channel, there's a diverse array of content that goes on this channel. There's always something to agree or disagree with, and plenty of space for discussion. So I welcome all newcomers. So please, if you're not a subscriber, do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.